the Living in the Imagination conference we just had, we were very, very fortunate to have Riane Eisler come in and talk to us. If you're not aware of her work, I urge you to look into it. Riane Eisler wrote The Chalice and the Blade, and she is a brilliant woman, archaeologist, a refugee from Nazi Europe, and her notion is, you know, that not that there was a patriarchy in prehistory and then we fell in, a matriarchy and then we fell into patriarchy, and that this has been the problem. She has managed to de-genderize the cultural debate by inventing the terms partnership culture and dominator culture. We live in a dominator culture, and so do the English, in spite of Margaret Thatcher. It's not about women, and it's not about men. It's about feminine and masculine attitudes. And Riane, using the work of Maria Gimbutas and other people, has made a brilliant case that the natural equilibrium state of human society is to be in a partnership culture where the only hierarchies are hierarchies of function. People do what they can do well, but an administrator is not a more advanced member of society than a gardener. Nothing is seen to be intrinsically somehow higher or lower. There are just functions performed by people. Well, the great hope that she holds out is that if we recognize that what happened was simply a mistake, the allowing of the dominator model to come into being, then recognizing it as a mistake, we can simply correct the mistake. So she offers tremendous hope. It's not a we are doomed and, the selfish gene, that rap, or the territorial imperative, that rap, or all of these we're doomed kind of raps that come out of sociobiology and that kind of thing. We're not doomed at all. Now, what I've hoped to do and want to do is accept Riane's premise that there was a partnership culture that around 1500 BC died out completely, its last stand being Minoan Crete, and that it was then replaced by a dominator culture. I accept all that. What I want to know is why? How could such a thing have happened? If a model of culture, an adaptation like that, had been perfected that worked, what factor could then come into the picture and overturn it and cause it to be lost? And I think what it is the partnership culture was feminized in its approach to society because it maintained a connection to the psychedelic world through plants. It kept a proper perspective on the true rank of import of the structures of the psyche, because as soon as you get the fall of Minoan Crete, what you get is the beginnings of Greek philosophy. And when you get formal philosophy, you get the rise of the Homeric period. All this happened about the same time. We're talking 1100 BC here in the Eastern Mediterranean. You get the glorification of the marauder, the warrior, the glorification of the king, and the evolution of slavery in the Greek model that we kept up with right up until 1865. The slaves of ancient Egypt were the property of the royal household. Slaveholding was not something that everybody was into, as it was later, where wealth meant slaves. So I think that what the psychedelic thing can be seen as is, when it's done with plants, is a return to Gaia, an immersion in the feminine, James Joyce talks about what he calls the mama matrix most mysterious. That's what you're seeing, those lights against darkness, all that stuff. It is the potential for creative exuberance that resides in the chthonic feminine matrix. It is the body of the goddess. And the ego can only create and maintain its tiny world of self-reflective concerns if it stifles this connection to the unconscious. So the terror of drugs that is paralyzing our society is, there's really only one terror in our society. It's the terror of the feminine. And the terror of drugs is a terror of giving up control. This is what people are most alarmed about by psychedelics, is the giving up control. And remember in the 60s it was all about ego loss, and people strove for it and claimed to have achieved it and this and that. And it was never couched in this male-female thing, but I think that's a male problem and a male way of of setting the table for the banquet to talk about ego loss. A partnership society is going to involve a lot of ego loss. It's going to involve a lot of seeing your brother and your sister as interchangeable with yourself. It's going to bring, I think, a major sexual revolution, because so much of sexuality over the past 500 years has been based on, it was almost the coinage of the ego's dealings with the world. How many women are under my domination? Are you mine? Am I yours? And people have always stressed that the problem was in the possession, but it's really in the casting of the subject and the object there. Me and you, not the relationship. And so I have, I'm sure you've all heard me say this on tape, to me the major metaphor that is operating in the 20th century is what I call the Archaic revival. Our civilization is falling to pieces. Its assumptions are no longer any good. It just doesn't work. And by our civilization, I mean from Moscow to the Potomac, to Tokyo, to Sydney, to Bangkok, and back to Paris. Global civilization is not working. It may still be working in the rainforest, but only if we haven't reached them yet. And as soon as we reach them, they'll be sent to work in sawmills and involved in growing coca for the drug trade and be ruined. When a society is in trouble, the way we are in trouble, what it does unconsciously, it just in the same way that a drowning person reaches outward, is it reaches outward for a previous cultural metaphor to stabilize itself. We can understand this by looking at the Renaissance, where as the medieval world began to crack to pieces, and cynicism about the church and the Pope and all of this, and cities began to, and the Jews began to be turned loose to make money, and trading networks began to be established. All of these new things began to be tolerated. The Renaissance reached back to Greece and Rome for steadying metaphors. And this is what classicism is. It's an effort to be more like Greece and Rome than Greece and Rome were, to have their laws, their architecture, their technologies, theories of road building, warfare, politics. In our situation, the culture crisis is much worse because of the bomb, because it is global, because of high-speed communication. We can't reach back to ancient Egypt or the Anastasi or the Maya. It has to be something further back. It actually has to be something outside of history. And this is what sets the stage for the Archaic revival. We want to return to the cultural models of 15 to 20,000 years ago. Not that we are going to become Neolithic people, but we need to cultivate the same things they cultivated for very different reasons. They were hunter-gatherers with a deep sensitivity to nature in order that their very small numbers could prosper and spread. We must become gardeners of the planet and ecologically conscious people, because otherwise there won't be any land left to stand on. Their concern with myth and ritual, with images from the unconscious expressed in mask making and carving and fetishes, we see early in the 20th century's concern for the great revolution in art. So Picasso went to West Africa and brought these masks back, and other people brought back primitive art, and it was seen to be, more true to the human feelings of the early 20th century than the romantic fin de siècle art that had come before, which was really the last tail wagging of the Baroque and Rococo era, which was the come down from the Renaissance. So modern art, the discoveries of Freud and Jung, that there was more to life than being awake or asleep, but that there were, spirits, the rebirth of a sense of spiritual values. At mid-century, it looked like we were all going to become French intellectuals, existential, atheistic, Marxist, just this flat, empty thing. Jean-Paul Sartre's statement on nature is mute. Nature has nothing to say to man. Well, this is, to my mind, a monstrous statement designed to lead people astray. If nature is mute, no wonder the existentialists felt lost. They had precluded the one connection to authentic being that was available to them. So I see the psychedelic experience as both the centerpiece of prehistoric life and destined to be the centerpiece of any future that we want to be part of. I mean, we can imagine fascist futures of vast regimentation and machine-like behavior where everyone is reduced to just being an automaton within a vaster automaton. But these are not futures we want to live with. A humane future is going to, as I said last night, place the expansion of consciousness in its very center. And this means accepting the role of the feminine, not as political rhetoric, but as the facts of the matter. I don't know if I told this group last night, but I always think of what Chesterton said. He said, men are men, but man is a woman. And that's the fact of the matter. And by realizing that man is a woman, there's no debate. It's not a discussion. There's no convincing. It's just a fact, like that water runs downhill. You're going to have to get straight about it. Then there is a possibility for fitting ourselves into a partnership future. Rian has thought this all out in her head, theoretically. I don't know whether she is a psychedelic traveler or not, but she and I immediately had lots to say to each other because she has, you could say, found her way there by another route. The tension in the world is the tension between the ego and the feminine, not between the masculine and the feminine. And everyone who has an ego, and many women in positions of power do, has an unresolved problem with this ego-feminine thing. The return to the archaic mode gives permission for this to happen, and the psychedelic experience stabilizes it. because women are always at home with the mystery, probably because they are the ones who give birth, and they are usually the ones who make dying, ease the way of the dying. So I don't think women have this desire for neatness and closure that dominates men. Men want it to be straightforward, well-organized, move on time, no mystery. Science, as the great enterprise of paternalism, has come to the end of its road. It has not only swept the kitchen, it's now sweeping the yard. And as it sweeps the yard, it's sinking deeper and deeper in the earth because there's no floor on reality. There is science, and they are beginning to admit this and say, well, there's something wrong. We thought it would be one more particle or one more something or other, and it just seems to endlessly recede in front of us. This is not a problem. This is a solution. This is what science has been needing to hear for 500 years, is enough already. We now have a science which can do anything or almost anything we want technologically. So that's its tool-making function. It's fulfilled that very nicely. Why do we believe that it will elucidate the mysteries of the soul? It won't. That's another concern. It's a concern of individuals. You want to understand the mystery of the soul, you don't get a $5 billion budget and a team of 6 universities linked by computer to attack it. No, you go into the wilderness and you eat mushrooms. It's that kind of work. It's more the work of the poet than the work of the research scientist. And certainly in the archaic mode, the poet was the model for men and women. I mean, poet has a masculine connotation in our society, but that's because we're so screwed up. We even had a separate word for women poets, a poetess, you see. But the making of poetry, the living in the primal world of poetry, can only be done if you have a direct connection to the mystery.